I sacrificed my retirement and peace of mind to help my son, Daniel, build a life for 35 years. I worked extra shifts as a nurse, put aside my own dreams, and even delayed needed medical treatments so he could have everything he needed. I paid for his college education, covered the down payment on his first apartment, and was always there when he needed emotional support. But the day he discovered I was planning to retire, he demanded I sell my beloved house to fund his failing business venture, calling me selfish and ungrateful when I hesitated. What he didn't know was that I had already legally gifted my home to the one person who had shown me genuine kindness and respect for years, his former girlfriend who had become like the daughter I never had. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first time Daniel mentioned his business idea, we were sitting in my kitchen on a crisp autumn evening. The maple trees outside my window blazed with orange and red, casting a warm glow across the countertops I'd saved for years to install. Daniel had just turned 35, and his enthusiasm was contagious as he spread blueprints and market projections across my kitchen table. "Mom, this is it. The investment opportunity of a lifetime," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "A luxury condo development right in the middle of downtown. We're talking 10 units starting at $1, $2 million each. The profit margins are incredible." I nodded, trying to share his enthusiasm while silently calculating the enormous risk. Daniel had always been ambitious, but his track record with businesses left much to be desired. There was the food delivery startup that folded after 6 months, the cryptocurrency trading scheme that burned through $30,000 of his savings, and the artisanal coffee shop that closed before its first anniversary. "That sounds wonderful, honey. Who's backing the project?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Daniel's smile faltered slightly. "Well, that's the thing. I'm still pulling together investors, but I've got meetings lined up with 3 potential partners next week." I nodded again, relieved he wasn't asking. Me to invest. My retirement fund was modest, the result of 40 years working as a registered nurse at County Memorial Hospital. I'd purchased my house 30 years ago as a single mother, after Daniel's father walked out when Daniel was just 5 years old. It wasn't fancy, but it was paid off. And the thought of spending my retirement years here, tending my garden and finally pursuing my passion for watercolor painting, was what kept me going through countless double shifts and holiday work rotations. "I'm proud of you for pursuing your dreams," I said sincerely. I truly was proud of his initiative, even if I worried about his follow-through. For the next few months, Daniel's business plans were all he talked about. Each time we spoke, the projected profits increased, while the details about actual investors remained vague. I noticed he had purchased a new luxury car to look the part when meeting potential clients, and his girlfriend Melissa, a corporate attorney 10 years his senior, seemed increasingly uncomfortable during family gatherings. When Daniel boasted about his imminent success, then came the Thursday evening that changed everything. I had just returned from my shift at the hospital, my feet aching after 10 hours of rounds, when Daniel showed up unannounced at my door. His expression was different, no longer excited, but calculated and intense. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important," he said, not waiting for an invitation before walking into my living room and settling on the couch. "The development project is ready to break ground, but I've hit a temporary cash flow issue." I sat down across from him, my nurse's intuition already sensing what was coming. "The investors are all in, but they're waiting on me to put up my share of the capital. $350,000, he continued. Once I do that, they'll release the full funding and we'll be off to the races. I remained silent, waiting for him to get to the point. I've been thinking, he said, leaning forward. Your house must be worth at least $500,000 in this market. If you sold it, you could give me the capital I need, and still have plenty left over. You've been talking about downsizing anyway, right? This is perfect timing. The audacity of his request took my breath away. I had never mentioned downsizing. In fact, I'd repeatedly told him how I was looking forward to retiring in this home, the one place that truly belonged to me after years of struggle. Daniel, this is my retirement security, I said carefully. I'm not in a position to make that kind of investment. His expression darkened instantly. Investment? This isn't an investment, Mom. This is you helping your son succeed. After everything I've done for you, you're going to hold back now? I was confused. Everything you've done for me? Yes, he exclaimed, standing up. Who do you think checks on you every week? Who helped you when you had that surgery 2 years ago? Who fixed your garage door last summer? I've always been there for you, and the one time I need something significant, you can't be bothered? The revisionist history was stunning. Yes, he had visited me after my knee surgery, for a total of 2 hours before claiming he had an important meeting. It was my colleague Sarah who had actually stayed with me for 3 days, helping me recover. And the garage door? He'd called a repairman and then asked to be reimbursed for the cost. I've supported you your entire life, Daniel, I said quietly. I worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I helped with the down payment on your condo. I've always been there for you. That's what parents are supposed to do, he snapped. It's the bare minimum. Now it's your turn to step up. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something big, and you're being selfish. Do you have any idea how this makes me look to my investors? I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that comes when something that has been slowly fracturing for years finally breaks clean through. In that moment, I saw my son clearly for perhaps the first time, not as the little boy I had raised and sacrificed for, but as the entitled man he had become. I'm not selling my house, Daniel, I said firmly. I'm sorry, but that's not going to happen. His face contorted with anger. You're making a huge mistake. When this development takes off, don't come asking for a piece of the profits. I would never, I assured him. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He stormed out, slamming my front door so hard that the framed photo of us at his college graduation fell from the wall and cracked. The following week was silent. No calls, no texts. Then came an email with the subject, line, "One last chance." Daniel wrote that he was giving me the opportunity to reconsider my selfish decision before he was forced to seek capital elsewhere at considerably less favorable terms. He ended by reminding me that as I got older, I would likely need his support, and my decision now would factor into his ability to help in the future. The thinly veiled threat made my hands shake. I deleted the email without responding. 3 days later, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Melissa, Daniel's girlfriend of 2 years, standing on my porch with an apologetic expression. "Helen, I'm so sorry to bother you," she said. "May I come in for a moment?" I'd always liked Melissa, unlike Daniel's previous girlfriends, most of whom seemed selected more for decorative value than substance. Melissa was intelligent, kind, and accomplished in her own right. She'd always treated me with genuine respect, asking about my nursing career and actually listening to my answers. She even remembered my birthday when Daniel himself often forgot. Over tea in my kitchen, Melissa revealed what had brought her to my door. "I've left Daniel," she said, her hands wrapped around the mug I'd given her. "And I think you should know why, because it concerns you." She explained that after my refusal to sell my house, Daniel had become obsessed with finding ways to access my assets. He'd researched whether he could claim power of attorney, looked into whether my home could be classified as family property, and even consulted a lawyer about challenging any future will I might create. The final straw was when I found him, going through financial documents he'd taken from your home office during his last visit, she said. "He had your banking information, retirement account details, everything." When I confronted him, he said it was his right to protect his inheritance. That's when I knew I couldn't stay with him anymore. I felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath me. The thought of my own son plotting against me, violating my privacy, treating me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited, it was almost too painful to process. "Thank you for telling me," I managed to say. "I'm so sorry about your relationship." Melissa shook her head. "Don't apologize, this isn't your fault. Daniel." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Daniel has always had a sense of entitlement. I just didn't realize how deep it went until now." After Melissa left, I sat alone in my kitchen for hours. The home that had always been my sanctuary now felt vulnerable, as if its very walls were under threat. I thought about all the memories it held. Daniel taking his first steps across the living room floor, homework sessions at the dining table, birthday celebrations in the backyard. I had always assumed that one day, yes, this house would pass to Daniel. It seemed the natural order of things. But now I wasn't so sure. The following morning, I called my bank and changed all my accounts and passwords. I contacted a security company about installing a new alarm system. And then I called my friend Patricia, who had been my confidant since nursing school and happened to be a retired attorney. "I need to talk about my will," I told her, "and about possibly making some changes to the ownership of my house." Patricia listened as I poured out the whole story, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Helen, what Daniel's doing borders on elder abuse," she said when I finished. "Financial exploitation is the most common form, and it often starts exactly like this, with pressure to sell assets or hand over money." "But I'm only 63, I protested. "I'm hardly elderly." Patricia's smile was sad. "That doesn't matter to people with Daniel's mindset. Once they see you as a resource rather than a person, age is irrelevant." Over the next few weeks, with Patricia's guidance, I made several significant decisions. I updated my will, removing Daniel as the primary beneficiary and instead designating several charities close to my heart. I set up a small trust that would provide him a modest income, but nothing close to the windfall he clearly expected. And most significantly, I began exploring options for the house itself. I considered selling it and using the money to travel, something I'd always dreamed of but never prioritized. I thought about renting it out for income while I lived in a smaller place. But neither option felt right. This house was more than just an asset. It was my home. The thought of strangers living in it felt wrong, but so did the idea of it eventually passing to a son who valued it only for its monetary worth. The solution came from an unexpected source. One Sunday afternoon, my doorbell rang again. This time, it was Melissa, looking hesitant but determined. "I hope I'm not overstepping," she said. But I wanted to check on you and to apologize again for Daniel's behavior. You have nothing to apologize for, I assured her, inviting her in. Over coffee, our conversation meandered through various topics: her work, my approaching retirement, books we'd both read. It was comfortable, genuine. At one point, Melissa mentioned she was struggling to find an apartment that would accept her rescue dog, a gentle pit bull mix named Blue. The condo Daniel and I shared doesn't allow pets over 30 pounds, she explained. I'm staying with a friend temporarily, but I need to find a place soon. An idea began to form in my mind, one that seemed both radical and perfectly right. Melissa, I said slowly, would you consider house-sitting for me? Long-term, I mean. She looked confused. Are you going somewhere? I explained that I'd been thinking about taking a year to travel after retirement. A nursing colleague had invited me to join her on an extended trip through Europe and Asia. I'd feel better knowing someone I trust was looking after the place. You could live here rent-free in exchange for maintaining the property. The relief and gratitude on Melissa's face confirmed I'd made the right suggestion. She accepted immediately, and what began as a house-sitting arrangement evolved into something deeper over the following months. Melissa helped me prepare for my travels, drove me to medical appointments, and even joined me in repainting the kitchen, something I'd been putting off for years. Where Daniel saw only a financial asset, Melissa saw a home worth caring for. 3 months before my planned departure, Daniel suddenly reappeared in my life. His luxury car was gone, replaced by a more modest sedan. His designer clothes looked slightly worn. The development project, it seemed, had fallen through when the other investors pulled out, citing irreconcilable differences with the business plan. I've been doing some thinking, Mom, he said, sitting in my living room with an expression of practiced contrition. I wasn't in a good place when we last spoke. I put too much pressure on you, and I'm sorry. The apology sounded rehearsed, lacking genuine remorse. Still, he was my son. Thank you for saying that, Daniel. His eyes darted around the room, noting the travel books on the coffee table, the new paint in the hallway. So, what's new with you? Any big plans? I told him about my upcoming retirement and travel plans, watching as he calculated the implications. That sounds great, he said, visibly relaxing. You deserve a break, and don't worry about the house. While you're gone, I'd be happy to check on it regularly. That's kind, but I've already arranged for someone to stay here, I replied. His brow furrowed. Who? Melissa, actually. She's been looking for a place, and this works out perfectly. Daniel's face darkened. Melissa? My ex-girlfriend? Are you serious? After what she did to me? What exactly did she do to you, Daniel? I asked calmly. He faltered. She walked out, without even trying to work things out. I see, I said, leaving it at that. Daniel shifted strategies, his voice softening. Look, Mom, I know we've had our differences, but I'm still your son. Having my ex-girlfriend living in what will eventually be my house just feels wrong. The words "my house" hung in the air between us, revealing exactly where his mind still was. Daniel, I said carefully, I think we need to clarify something. This house isn't yours, it's mine. I decide who lives here, now and in the future. His facade cracked. Oh, come on. Who else would you leave it to? I'm your only child, your only family. Unless you're planning to take it with you to the grave? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. My estate plans are private, I said firmly, and not up for discussion. Daniel's expression shifted from disbelief to calculation to barely contained rage. "This is because of Melissa, isn't it? She's turned you against me. She's after your money. Can't you see that? She couldn't get what she wanted from me, so now she's manipulating you." I stood up, suddenly tired of the conversation. "I think you should leave now, Daniel." "Fine," he spat, standing as well. "But don't think this is over. That house belongs in our family, and I'll make sure it stays that way." As he stormed out, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The son I had raised was still in there somewhere, I believed, buried beneath layers of entitlement and greed. But I couldn't sacrifice my security or my self-respect, waiting for him to re-emerge. The following week, after consulting again, with Patricia, I made my final decision about the house. I called Melissa and invited her over for dinner. "I have a proposition for you," I said as we sat on my back porch, watching fireflies begin to dot the evening air. "It's completely your choice, and I'll understand if it's not something you want." I explained that I had decided to transfer ownership of my house to her through a life estate deed. I would retain the right to live in it for the rest of my life, but upon my death, it would pass directly to her, bypassing probate and any potential challenges. "But why?" she asked, clearly stunned. "Helen, this is too much. This house should go to your family." "You've been more family to me these past months than Daniel has in years," I said simply. "You see this place as a home, not as a dollar amount. That matters to me." Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept," I urged. "Say you'll keep loving this old house even when I'm gone. That's all I ask." The papers were signed the following month. My attorney assured me that the arrangement was legally sound. A life estate couldn't be contested the way a will might be. I would continue to live in my home, take my planned travels, and return whenever I wished. But the future of the house was now secure, entrusted to someone who would cherish it. I didn't tell Daniel about the arrangement. There seemed no point in provoking another confrontation. But like many secrets in small communities, this one didn't stay hidden for long. One evening, just 2 weeks before my departure for Europe, Daniel appeared at my door again. This time he wasn't alone. He had brought a man in a suit whom he introduced as my attorney, Mr. Grayson. "Mom, we need to talk about what you've done," Daniel said, pushing past me into the house. "Mr. Grayson has some serious concerns about your mental capacity and the undue influence being exerted on you." I remained calm, thanking my nursing experience for the ability to maintain composure in tense situations. "I'm not discussing my personal affairs with strangers, Daniel. Please leave." "Not until you explain why you've given my inheritance to that gold-digging ex of mine," he demanded. "Mr. Grayson thinks we have grounds to invalidate the transfer. Diminished capacity, coercion, fraud. Take your pick." The attorney looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Collins, if we could just sit down and review the circumstances of this property transfer, I'm sure we can find an amicable solution." "The only solution I see is for both of you to leave my property immediately," I said, my voice steady, but firm. "Any further communication can go through my attorney. Here's her card." I handed Patricia's business card to the increasingly uncomfortable-looking Mr. Grayson, who glanced at it and then at Daniel. "You didn't mention your mother was represented by Patricia Henderson," he said quietly to Daniel. To me, he gave a curt nod. "We'll be in touch through proper channels, Mrs. Collins. I apologize for the interruption." Daniel wasn't ready to leave. "This isn't over, Mom." That house is my birthright. You've worked as a nurse your whole life. What made you think you could outsmart me legally? Perhaps the fact that I've always valued education and critical thinking, I replied. Something I tried to instill in you as well. As they left, I heard Mr. Grayson murmuring to Daniel, I should warn you, contesting a life estate is extremely difficult, especially with no evidence of diminished capacity. That night, I called Melissa and updated her on what had happened. You don't need this drama in your life, I told her. If you want to back out of our arrangement, I'll understand. Her response was immediate and firm. Absolutely not. Daniel doesn't get to bully either of us. Besides, Patricia helped structure everything perfectly legal. He doesn't have a case. She was right. Over the next month, Daniel made several attempts to challenge the transfer, claiming everything from my mental incompetence to Melissa's malicious interference in a family relationship. Each effort was quickly shut down by Patricia, who took particular pleasure in defending our arrangement. Life estates have been recognized in common law for centuries, she explained to me over lunch one day. They're practically bulletproof. When executed properly, especially with a fully competent grantor, that's you, and no evidence of coercion. Daniel's attorney knows this, which is why they're getting increasingly desperate. The desperation peaked when Daniel showed up at my doorstep one final time just days before my departure. This time, there was no attorney, no pretense of legal action. Instead, he tried a different approach, one that cut deeper than any lawsuit could have. Do you have any idea what people are saying about you? He demanded. That you've abandoned your only son for some woman half your age? That you must be confused or manipulated? Do you know how this makes me look? I sighed. Daniel, when did your reputation become my responsibility? You're my mother, he exclaimed. Everything you do reflects on me, and everything you do reflects on yourself, I countered, including how you've treated me these past months. He stared at me, momentarily speechless. In that brief silence, I saw something shift in his eyes, not understanding or remorse, but calculation, a new strategy forming. Mom, he said, his voice suddenly gentle. I'm worried about you. You've been working so hard all these years. Maybe you're just tired. Maybe what you need isn't some impulsive trip across the world, but rest. Time with family. Your family. He emphasized the last words, reaching for my hand. I withdrew it, carefully. I appreciate the concern, Daniel, but my decisions aren't impulsive or made from fatigue. They're made with clarity and purpose. Is this about Dad? He asked abruptly. Are you punishing me because I remind you of him? The question caught me off guard. Daniel's father, Mitchell, had walked out when Daniel was just 5 years old. He had been charming, ambitious, and utterly self-absorbed, traits I sometimes saw reflected in our son. But I had never made that comparison aloud, never used it as a weapon. No, Daniel, this isn't about your father. It's about choices and consequences. Your choices, my consequences. He made one last attempt, his voice dropping to a whisper. Don't do this, Mom. Don't leave me with nothing. You have your education, your health, your youth. Those are the true inheritances I gave you. The rest was never promised. As he walked away that final time, shoulders hunched against the truth of my words, I felt an unexpected lightness. The cord that had bound us in this unhealthy dynamic had finally been cut. Not the bond of mother and son that would always remain, complicated and tangled as it might be. But the cord of obligation that had allowed him to drain my resources and self-worth for years. 2 days later, I boarded a plane to London, the first stop on my journey. As the aircraft lifted into the clouds, I felt myself rising too, above the drama, above the guilt, above the lifelong pattern of putting everyone else's needs before my own. The next 6 months were transformative. With my colleague Sarah beside me, I explored the cobblestone streets of Prague, the sun-drenched coast of Croatia, the ancient temples of Thailand. I sketched watercolors of the sunset over Santorini, took cooking classes in Florence, and even went paragliding in New Zealand, something I'd never have dreamed of attempting in my previous life. Through it all, Melissa sent regular updates about the house, complete with photos of freshly planted flower beds and the new kitchen backsplash she'd installed. "Just wanted to run this by you first," she'd write, though we both knew the house was legally hers to modify as she wished. Her respect for my attachment to the property only confirmed I'd made the right decision. Daniel, meanwhile, continued his campaign from afar. Friends back home reported that he'd been telling anyone who would listen about his mentally declining mother, who had been manipulated into giving away the family home. Some believed him. Others, who had known me for decades, saw through the desperate attempt to salvage his pride. I might have continued traveling indefinitely if not for an unexpected email from Patricia. "Need to discuss an urgent matter," her message read. "Please, call when convenient." The urgent matter, it turned out, was Daniel again. He had taken his efforts to a new level, filing a formal complaint with the state nursing board, alleging that I had exploited my medical knowledge to obtain medication that impaired my judgment during the period when I transferred the house to Melissa. "It's completely baseless," Patricia assured me over our video call. "But you'll need to respond. They're obligated to investigate any complaint against a licensed nurse, no matter how ridiculous." I ended my journey early, flying back to face this latest challenge. Despite my apprehension, returning home felt right. My travels had given me strength, perspective, and most importantly, the certainty that I deserved better than to be manipulated by my own child. Melissa met me at the airport, her warm hug a welcome contrast to the stress of the situation. "The house is ready for you," she said. "I moved back to my apartment last week so you could settle in properly." "That wasn't necessary," I told her. "It's your home too now." She shook her head firmly. "It's your home for as long as you live, Helen. That was our agreement. Besides, I found a great place that allows Blue, and it's closer to my office." As we drove through familiar streets, Melissa updated me on the local gossip, carefully avoiding any mention of Daniel until we were settled in my living room with cups of tea. "He's been busy," she said finally. "Besides the nursing board complaint, he's told practically everyone in town that I seduced you into signing over the house. According to him, I'm a manipulative gold digger who spotted a vulnerable older woman and saw an opportunity." Despite everything, I laughed. "If that were true, you've played an impressively long game. Befriending me years before you even broke up with him, just on the off chance I might someday gift you a modest 3-bedroom house?" Melissa smiled, but her eyes remained worried. "Some people believe him, Helen, particularly at his church. The pastor's wife called me last month to say she was praying for my redemption." "Let them believe what they want," I said, surprised by my own indifference. "The truth doesn't require universal acceptance to remain true." The nursing board investigation was brief and conclusive. My medical records showed no history of cognitive impairment or substance use. My attorney provided documentation of my consistent lucidity and independence. And most damning to Daniel's case, he couldn't produce a single witness who had observed any concerning behavior from me prior to the property transfer. The complaint was dismissed with an official letter of apology for the inconvenience. Should have been the end of Daniel's campaign. Instead, it was merely the beginning of a new phase. One morning, about 3 weeks after my return, I opened my local newspaper to find Daniel's face smiling at me from the community section. The headline read, "Local Entrepreneur Launches Foundation for Elder Protection." The article quoted Daniel extensively about his personal mission to protect seniors from financial exploitation after witnessing his own mother fall victim to a predatory individual who isolated her from family and alienated her affections. He announced plans for workshops, support groups, and eventually, legislative advocacy for stronger protections against elder manipulation. It was a masterful strategy. By positioning himself as an advocate rather than a disgruntled son, he had found a socially acceptable vehicle for his revenge. Every flyer distributed, every workshop conducted, every sympathetic nod from his audience was a public repudiation of my autonomy and judgment. For a moment, I considered fighting back, writing a letter to the editor perhaps, or showing up at one of his workshops to challenge his narrative directly. But that would only escalate the situation, drawing more attention to a private family matter and potentially lending credibility to his claims. No, this required a different approach entirely. I called Patricia again, this time not as my attorney but as my friend. "I need your honest opinion," I said after explaining the situation. "Am I being too harsh with Daniel? Should I have just given him the money for his business?" Patricia's response was immediate and firm. "Absolutely not. Helen, what you're experiencing is a textbook case of financial elder abuse. The fact that it's coming from your son doesn't make it any less abusive." "But he's struggling," I said, voicing the doubt that still lingered despite everything. "Maybe if I had helped him with his business?" "Then what?" Patricia interrupted. "He would have come back for more. That's how these situations progress. First, it's just selling your house. Then, it would be your retirement accounts. Then, pressure to take out loans you can't afford. I've seen it happen dozens of times." Deep down, I knew she was right. Daniel's sense of entitlement to my assets wouldn't have been satisfied by one business investment. But knowing this intellectually didn't ease the emotional burden completely. He was still my son, the little boy I had raised alone, the teenager whose nightmares I had soothed, the young man whose college graduation had filled me with immeasurable pride. That evening, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My neighbor Eleanor, a widow in her 70s who had become a close friend over the years, joined me with a bottle of wine. "I saw the article," she said without preamble, pouring us each a glass. What a crock of self-serving nonsense. I smiled gratefully. "Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the crazy one." Eleanor snorted. "Please. The only crazy thing you did was wait so long to stand up for yourself. If my Jonathan had lived to see how my own son treated me after the inheritance came through, he'd have risen from the grave to set the boy straight." She told me her own story then, how after her husband's death, her son had pressured her to invest her entire inheritance in his chain of fitness centers. When she refused, offering a smaller amount instead, he had accused her of choosing money over family and practically cut off communication. 3 years later, all those fitness centers went belly up anyway, she said, refilling our glasses. He lost everything, including the money I did give him. And guess who he came crawling back to for help? Did you help him? I asked. Of course I did, but on my terms. I paid for him to get financial counseling. I helped with his children's education, but through direct payments to their schools. I never again handed him cash directly. She fixed me with a knowing look. The thing is, Helen, our children will be as entitled as we allow them to be. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're an act of love, both for them and for ourselves. Her words stayed with me long after she left. Boundaries as an act of love. I had never thought of it that way before. My entire life had been structured around the absence of boundaries, always available, always providing, always sacrificing. What kind of example had that set for Daniel? The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't engage with Daniel's foundation directly. I wouldn't try to counter his narrative or defend myself publicly. Instead, I would demonstrate through action what genuine elder advocacy looked like. I contacted the director of the Senior I Center, where I had occasionally volunteered before my travels, offering to create a workshop series on financial independence for older adults, not focused on exploitation or abuse, but on empowerment, investment basics, estate planning, tax considerations for retirement, and resources for those who wanted to start small businesses or pursue education in their later years. I'd like to start with a session on unconventional housing options, I told the director. Life estates, co-housing arrangements, house-sharing programs, approaches that can provide both financial security and community as we age. The director was enthusiastic, and within weeks, my first workshop was scheduled. I invited Eleanor and several other friends, but didn't publicly advertise it beyond the senior center's usual channels. This wasn't about competing with Daniel. It was about offering a positive alternative to his fear-based approach. To my surprise, the first session was packed. 30 seniors, ranging from early 60s to late 80s, filled the community. Room, notebooks in hand, and questions at the ready. Many had read about Daniel's foundation, they told me, but were put off by its focus on vulnerability rather than strength. "We're not all dotty old fools waiting to be swindled," one gentleman in his 70s announced to general agreement. "Some of us are making the best financial decisions of our lives right now." The workshops became a weekly fixture, expanding to include guest speakers, financial advisors, attorneys, real estate specialists willing to share their expertise without sales pitches. We created a resource guide, developed a mentorship program pairing financially savvy seniors with those who wanted to learn, and eventually established a small grant fund to help older adults pursue business ideas or educational opportunities. Word spread, and attendance grew. Local media took notice, with the town paper running a feature on our Senior Financial Empowerment Initiative, complete with photos of workshop participants engaged in animated discussions about investment strategies and small business launches. I never mentioned Daniel or his foundation during these sessions. I didn't need to. The contrast in approaches spoke for itself, his portraying seniors as victims, mine celebrating them as capable decision-makers. His warning families to watch for signs of manipulation, mine encouraging older adults to assert their financial independence. It was during the 4th month of workshops that Melissa called with unexpected news. "You need to see this," she said, her voice tight with concern. "Daniel's been posting videos online, and the latest one is... Well, you should just watch it. I'll send you the link." The video, posted to Daniel's foundation page, showed him sitting at a desk in what appeared to be a professional office. a bookshelf of legal text visible behind him. He spoke directly to the camera, his expression solemn. "I've received numerous questions about my personal connection to elder financial abuse," he began. "Many of you know that my advocacy was inspired by my mother's situation, but I've been reluctant to share the full details out of respect for her privacy. However, as her condition deteriorates and the manipulation continues, I feel a responsibility to share our story as a warning to others." He went on to paint a devastating picture: an aging nurse, increasingly isolated after retirement, befriended by a younger woman with suspicious timing and motivations. He described a sudden personality change following my transfer of property, my uncharacteristic decision to travel abroad, and my refusal to acknowledge the exploitation that was obvious to everyone who truly knew her. Most disturbing of all, he referenced my workshops, twisting them into evidence of manipulation. "The predator has now convinced my mother to become a public advocate for the very arrangements that stripped her of her security," he said, his voice breaking in a practiced display of emotion. "It's a common tactic, getting the victim to defend their abuser, to normalize the exploitation. It's heartbreaking to witness." The video had thousands of views already, with comments ranging from sympathetic support for Daniel to outright calls for investigation into Melissa and me. One viewer had even suggested contacting Adult Protective Services to rescue me from my apparent captor. My first reaction was rage, pure, undiluted fury at the public smearing of both my character and Melissa's. My second was fear. Could these baseless allegations actually trigger an investigation? Could Daniel's campaign of lies impact my nursing license or my reputation in the community? But as the initial shock faded, a different emotion emerged: pity. What kind of emptiness must exist within my son that he would go to such extraordinary lengths to punish me for asserting my independence? What kind of wound drove him to fabricate this elaborate narrative rather than simply accepting that he was not entitled to my assets? I called Patricia immediately, expecting her to recommend legal action. A cease and desist letter at minimum, perhaps a defamation suit. Instead, she suggested something entirely different. "Respond with your own video," she said. "Not defensive, not angry, just you, speaking your truth calmly and directly. Let people see the woman Daniel is describing as deteriorating and manipulated. Let them judge for themselves." The idea terrified me. I had never sought public attention, had never been comfortable in the spotlight. But Patricia was right. Daniel's narrative thrived in the absence of my voice. It was time to reclaim my story. With Eleanor's help, I set up a simple recording in my living room, just me, speaking candidly to my phone camera. I wore my regular clothes, used no special lighting or effects, and spoke without a script. "My name is Helen Collins," I began. "I'm 63 years old, a registered nurse of 40 years, and recently retired. I'm also the mother referenced in Daniel Collins' videos about elder exploitation. I'm recording this not to attack my son, but to correct some misconceptions about my situation and my choices." For the next 10 minutes, I laid out the facts simply and without embellishment. My decades of supporting Daniel, his demand that I sell my house to fund his business venture, his angry reaction when I refused, and his subsequent campaign to portray me as mentally incompetent. I explained my decision to create a life estate deed with Melissa, emphasizing that I retained the right to live in my home for life, and that the arrangement provided me with both security and peace of mind. I made this choice not out of confusion or manipulation, but out of clarity and self-respect, I said. At 63, I am not elderly, I am not vulnerable, and I am certainly not incapable of managing my own affairs, as my nursing license and continuing professional standing can attest. I ended with a direct address not to Daniel, but to other parents who might be experiencing similar pressure from adult children. Your resources are yours to allocate as you see fit. Your home, your savings, your retirement. These belong to you, not to your children, regardless of their expectations. Loving your child does not require sacrificing your security or dignity. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for both of you, is to say no. Eleanor helped me upload the video to a newly created account, and we shared it with my workshop participants, asking them to distribute it if they felt it reflected the woman they had come to know. Within days, it had surpassed Daniel's video in views, shared across social networks and senior advocacy groups far beyond our small community. The comments section filled with messages of support, not just for me but from other parents sharing similar experiences. My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 5 years because I wouldn't cash out my retirement to buy her a house. My son tried to guilt me into skipping needed medical care to pay for his wedding. I thought I was the only one who felt like an ATM instead of a parent. The outpouring revealed a painful truth. My situation was far from unique. A generation of parents who had sacrificed everything for their children were now facing unprecedented pressure to continue that sacrifice well into retirement, often to their own detriment. Daniel's response came swiftly and predictably. Within hours of my video going viral, he posted a new one, his tone now somber with practiced concern. "I'm deeply saddened to see my mother's condition worsening," he said, shaking his head slowly. This public display only confirms what many professionals warn about, how victims of manipulation will often defend their abusers, even adopt their language and perspectives. He cited expert sources about something called predatory befriending and urged viewers not to be fooled by superficial appearances of competence. The more articulate and composed I appeared, he suggested, the more skillfully I had been coached. It was a masterful inversion, using my very clarity as evidence of my supposed incapacity. Any defense I offered could be twisted into further proof of manipulation. It was gaslighting at its most insidious. But Daniel had miscalculated in one crucial way. By bringing our private conflict into the public sphere, he had inadvertently created space for other voices, objective, unbiased observers who could see through his narrative. The first such voice came from an unexpected source. Dr. Rebecca Winters, a geriatric psychiatrist who had viewed both videos, posted a professional response that quickly gained traction. "While I cannot diagnose someone I haven't evaluated," she began carefully, "I can speak to general patterns of elder exploitation versus autonomous decision-making. What I observe in Helen Collins' video are the hallmarks of autonomous choice: clear articulation of values, consistent reasoning, awareness of alternatives, and appropriate emotional responses to challenges. These are not typically present in cases of genuine manipulation." Other professionals joined the conversation: elder law attorneys, financial advisors specializing in retirement planning, and social workers experienced in cases of actual elder abuse. Without exception, they noted the red flags in Daniel's approach, particularly his infantilizing language and his focus on control rather than his mother's well-being. Then came support from an even more significant quarter. My former colleagues at County Memorial Hospital created a joint statement, signed by 16 nurses and 3 physicians who had worked alongside me for decades. Helen Collins served this community with extraordinary competence, judgment, and compassion for 40 years, the statement read. Those qualities don't disappear upon retirement. Any suggestion that she lacks capacity to manage her affairs is not merely incorrect, but disrespectful to a healthcare professional who has demonstrated exemplary decision-making throughout her career. The hospital's legal department had insisted they remain neutral on the specific dispute between Daniel and me, but their vouching for my professional judgment and cognitive capacity was powerful nonetheless. Most revealing was the response from the seniors in my workshop groups. Without my knowledge, they had organized an I Stand with Helen social media campaign, sharing their experiences of working with me and contrasting my empowerment approach with Daniel's infantilizing one. Helen Collins taught me how to restructure my investments to increase my monthly income by 30%, wrote one 72-year-old participant. Her allegedly deteriorating mind helped me achieve financial independence for the first time in my life. I took both workshops, Daniel's and Helen's, wrote another. His spent 2 hours warning us about predators without offering a single practical financial strategy. Hers gave me actionable steps that saved me $14,000 in taxes last year. You tell me who's really helping seniors. As support mounted, Daniel's foundation began to crumble. Scheduled workshops were canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. Partner organizations quietly removed his materials from their websites. The local newspaper, which had enthusiastically covered the launch of his foundation, now published a follow-up article titled, Questions Raised About Elder Advocacy Groups, Methods and Motives. Through it all, I maintained my policy of not addressing Daniel directly. I continued my workshops, expanded our resource guides, and focused on the positive work of empowering seniors rather than defending myself against baseless accusations. It wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake, heart racing with anxiety about what new tactic Daniel might try next. There were moments when grief overwhelmed me, not just for the relationship we'd lost, but for the son I thought I'd raised. How had the sweet little boy who once made me handmade Mother's Day cards transformed into this manipulative stranger? During one particularly difficult night, I found myself digging through old photo albums, tracing Daniel's development from chubby-cheeked toddler to serious young graduate. Had I missed the warning signs? Had I somehow created this sense of entitlement through my own parenting choices? A text message interrupted my spiral of self-doubt. It was from Claire, one of my workshop participants, sharing that she had finally stood up to her son, who had been pressuring her to co-sign a business loan. I said no, just like you taught us, she wrote. He didn't speak to me for 3 days, but this morning he called to apologize, said he realized he'd been taking advantage. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to set boundaries. Messages. Like Claire's became my anchor. Whatever mistakes I might have made with Daniel, the work I was doing now was helping others break free from similar patterns. That had to count for something. As Daniel's foundation activities dwindled, I began to hope that perhaps he was finally moving on. Those hopes were shattered when Patricia called with distressing news. Daniel has filed a petition for guardianship, she said bluntly. He's asking the court to declare you incapacitated and appoint him as your legal guardian with full control over your financial and medical decisions. The room seemed to tilt around me. Can he do that? He can file, Patricia said grimly. Getting it approved is another matter entirely. These petitions typically require substantial evidence of incapacity, medical evaluations, documented patterns of harmful decision-making, testimonials from people with direct knowledge of your condition. Which he doesn't have, I said, trying to steady my voice. No, but he's trying to create it. He submitted your video as evidence of erratic behavior and uncharacteristic public attention-seeking. He's also found 2 former neighbors willing to testify that you've exhibited concerning changes since retirement. I knew immediately who those neighbors must be: the Hendersons, an elderly couple who had been close friends with Daniel for years. They had stopped speaking to me after the house transfer, crossing the street to avoid me when we crossed paths. "What happens now?" I asked. "The court will schedule a hearing," Patricia explained. "Before that, they'll likely appoint a court investigator to interview you, review medical records, and gather evidence about your capacity. You'll need to undergo an evaluation with an approved geriatric psychiatrist." "And if Daniel somehow wins?" Patricia's voice softened. "If the court appointed him as guardian, which I consider extremely unlikely given the facts, he would have legal authority over your financial decisions, including potentially voiding the life estate arrangement with Melissa. The guardianship petition was Daniel's nuclear option, a final, desperate attempt to seize control of my assets. It was also, I realized with a mixture of sadness and clarity, the ultimate revelation of his character. This wasn't about concern for my welfare. It was about the house, the money, the inheritance he believed was his by right of birth. The court investigator, a soft-spoken woman named Marjorie with 20 years of experience in elder law, arrived at my home the following week. She spent 3 hours interviewing me, observing my living conditions, reviewing my financial records, and discussing my daily activities and future plans. "Mrs. Collins," she said as our session concluded, "I just want to say that in my 20 years doing this work, I've conducted hundreds of these investigations. Many involve adult children with genuine concerns about parents showing real signs of cognitive decline or vulnerability to exploitation." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "This case does not appear to fit that pattern." Her official report, filed with the court 2 weeks later, was unambiguous. It stated that I demonstrated exceptional cognitive clarity, financial sophistication, and appropriate awareness of both my resources and potential vulnerabilities. It noted that my decision to create a life estate was consistent with established estate planning practices and reflected thoughtful consideration of both my own security and the future disposition of my property. Most damning to Daniel's case, the report specifically addressed his claims of manipulation, finding no evidence of undue influence or coercion, and noting that my relationship with Melissa predated the property arrangement by several years, with multiple witnesses, confirming a mutually supportive friendship rather than a predatory dynamic. The court-appointed geriatric psychiatrist reached similar conclusions, finding no evidence of cognitive impairment, thought disorder, or vulnerability to exploitation. Her report specifically noted that my decision-making demonstrated appropriate consideration of consequences, alternatives, and personal values, all hallmarks of uncompromised capacity. Armed with these reports, Patricia filed a motion to dismiss the guardianship petition. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. As the hearing approached, my anxiety peaked. Despite the favorable expert opinions, I feared standing in a courtroom facing my only child across a gulf of hostility and betrayal. How had our relationship deteriorated to this point? Was there any path back from such a profound breach of trust? The night before the hearing, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Collins? This is Lawrence Grayson. I represented your son Daniel briefly in this matter. The attorney who had accompanied Daniel to my home months ago. What do you want, Mr. Grayson? I wanted to inform you that I withdrew from the case last week, he said. I felt that ethically I could no longer advocate for a position that all evidence contradicts. I've counseled Daniel to withdraw his petition, but... He trailed off. But he refused, I finished. Yes, he's proceeding pro se, representing himself. I thought you should know. Why are you telling me this? There was a long pause. Because I've been practicing elder law for 30 years, Mrs. Collins. I've seen genuine cases of incapacity, exploitation, and abuse. And I've seen other situations. Situations where adult children use the legal system to try to control parents who are simply making choices they disagree with. I took this case initially because Daniel presented a compelling narrative of concern. As the evidence mounted against that narrative, I expected him to reconsider. But he didn't, I said softly. No, and that tells me this was never truly about your welfare. He sighed. I apologize for my role in causing you distress. That was never my intention. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet living room, turning his words over in my mind. Even Daniel's own attorney had recognized the truth of the situation. Would Daniel ever see it? The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, with wood-paneled walls and uncomfortable benches. Patricia sat beside me at one table, her calm presence steadying. Across the aisle, Daniel sat alone, a stack of papers before him, his expression a mixture of determination and what looked almost like excitement, the thrill of the fight, regardless of the cost. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and penetrating eyes, began by summarizing the petition and the investigative findings. She then looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Collins, the court investigator and appointed psychiatrist have both found no evidence supporting your claims regarding your mother's incapacity. Do you have additional evidence you wish to present? Daniel stood, straightening his tie. Your Honor, experts can be fooled. I've known my mother my entire life. The woman sitting here today is not the woman who raised me. The Helen Collins I know would never have betrayed her family by giving away our home to an outsider. That's not evidence, Mr. Collins, the judge said evenly. That's your opinion about a decision you disagree with. Do you have any medical evidence contradicting Dr. Levine's evaluation? Any witnesses with healthcare credentials who can testify to observed symptoms of cognitive decline? Daniel faltered. No, but do you have evidence of your mother making objectively harmful financial decisions? Giving away funds she needs for her own support? Accumulating unusual debt? Falling victim to scams? No, Your Honor. But this life estate arrangement. According to both the financial analysis in the court investigator's report and the testimony of Mrs. Collins' longtime financial advisor, the life estate arrangement provides her with security while allowing her to determine the future disposition of her property. It does not appear to harm her financial interests in any way. The judge's voice was firm. Mr. Collins, I must be frank. The court takes guardianship matters extremely seriously because they involve the potential removal of an individual's fundamental rights. The standard of evidence is appropriately high. She shuffled through papers before continuing. Based on the comprehensive investigations conducted, I see no evidence whatsoever supporting your petition. What I do see is a pattern of behavior that raises serious concerns about your motives. Daniel's face flushed. My motives? I'm trying to protect my mother. The judge looked at him steadily. Mr. Collins, this court regularly sees cases where adult children genuinely seek to protect vulnerable parents. We also, unfortunately, see cases where guardianship is pursued as a means of controlling a parent's financial decisions, particularly regarding inheritance. The evidence before me strongly suggests your petition falls into the latter category. She turned to address me directly, her expression softening slightly. Mrs. Collins, based on all available evidence, you are clearly capable of managing your own affairs and making your own decisions. This petition for guardianship is denied. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the hollow ache of watching my son's final attempt to control me crumble before his eyes. As the judge prepared to adjourn, Daniel suddenly spoke again, his voice rising. This isn't right. She's my mother. That house should be mine. It's always been understood that it would pass to me. She had no right to— Mr. Collins. The judge interrupted sharply. You've just illustrated my point precisely. This was never about your mother's capacity. It was about your belief that you are entitled to her property regardless of her wishes. She banged her gavel. This hearing is adjourned. Outside the courtroom, Patricia squeezed my hand. It's over, Helen. He has no more legal avenues to pursue. I watched Daniel storm down the courthouse steps, not once looking back at me. It's over legally, I agreed. But the damage to our relationship may be permanent. That's his choice. Now, Patricia said gently, you've done everything you could. The rest is up to him. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea, watching lightning bugs begin their nightly dance across my garden. The legal battle was behind me, but the emotional wounds remained raw and throbbing. I had won, yet it felt like the hollowest of victories. My phone chimed with a message from Eleanor. Heard the good news. Celebration dinner tomorrow? The whole workshop group wants to toast your victory. I smiled despite my melancholy. From the ordeal had emerged unexpected gifts, deeper friendships, a newfound community, and a purpose that extended beyond my own situation to helping others reclaim their autonomy. As the summer evening deepened into dusk, I found myself reflecting not on what I had lost, but on what I had found. Strength I didn't know I possessed. Clarity about my values and boundaries. The courage to say no to someone I loved when saying yes would have diminished us both. Most surprisingly, I had found a kind of freedom I had never experienced before. Freedom from the crushing weight of endless obligation, from the fear of disapproval, from the exhausting effort of trying to purchase love through sacrifice. The house around me, once just walls and a roof, had transformed into something more profound, a symbol of my right to shape my own life, to choose my own path, to define family not merely by blood, but by respect and genuine care. I thought of Melissa, who had remained steadfast throughout the ordeal despite having every reason to walk away from the drama. I thought of my workshop participants, many of whom were finding their own voices after decades of silence. I thought even of Daniel, and wondered if someday, perhaps years from now, he might gain the perspective to understand that my refusal to fund his business had never been about withholding love, but about respecting both of our journeys. As darkness fell completely, I realized that the story of my house, who owned it, who would inherit it, had never really been about the physical structure at all. It had been about something far more valuable, the right to author my own life, to the very last chapter. I picked up my phone and responded to Eleanor. Count me in for dinner. We have much to celebrate, not just a legal victory, but the freedom to choose our own paths, whatever age we may be. Then I reached for the small sketchbook I had begun carrying during my travels. In the gentle glow of the porch light, I began to draw. Not my house as it was, but as it could be. A community gathering space for my workshop participants. Gallery for senior artists. A garden where intergenerational groups could work side by side. The life estate ensured the property would eventually pass to Melissa, but that didn't mean I couldn't reimagine its purpose during my lifetime. If Daniel had taught me anything, it was that waiting for the future often meant missing the possibilities of the present. I turned to a fresh page and began to list ideas for expanding our workshops beyond financial topics. Creative pursuits for seniors, technological literacy classes, intergenerational mentorship programs. The rejection that had initially devastated me had become the catalyst for a new chapter filled with purpose and possibility. Somewhere across town, Daniel was likely still seething, plotting his next move or nursing his wounded pride. I couldn't control that. What I could control was my response, not just surviving his rejection, but thriving despite it, creating meaning from what had been intended to diminish me. The chirping of crickets filled the night air as I continued to sketch and plan, my excitement growing with each new idea. The house Daniel had so desperately wanted would become something he had never envisioned. Not a static asset to be hoarded or controlled, but a dynamic space for growth, connection, and empowerment. In trying to take everything from me, my son had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to discover who I truly was beyond the role of mother, provider, and perpetual sacrifice. The woman emerging from this crucible was someone I was just getting to know, resilient, purposeful, and finally, wholly her own. 1 year passed. The seasons cycled through their eternal dance, summer fading into autumn's tapestry, winter's quiet stillness giving way to spring's renewal. My house transformed alongside nature's rhythm, not in its physical structure, but in its purpose and meaning. The formal dining room I had rarely used became our workshop headquarters, walls lined with bookshelves filled with financial resources, legal guides, and inspirational stories of seniors reinventing themselves. The spacious kitchen, once the site of tense conversations with Daniel, now regularly filled with the aroma of coffee and the animated discussions of our expanding community. What began as simple financial workshops had evolved into something far more comprehensive, what we now called the Second Chapter Initiative. We offered classes on everything from technology and social media to art, fitness tailored for aging bodies, and entrepreneurship for those looking to turn lifelong hobbies into retirement income. Most popular were our Life Reimagined sessions, where participants created detailed plans for their next decade, not just financially, but holistically. What skills did they want to develop? What relationships needed nurturing? What adventures remained untaken? What legacy did they hope to leave? "We've been defined by others for so long," Eleanor often said during these sessions. As mothers, wives, caregivers, employees, this is our chance to define ourselves by our own standards and desires. The transformation of my home into this vibrant community space happened organically. First came the weekly workshops, then twice weekly as demand grew. Soon, participants were asking to use the space for their own projects. A retired English teacher offering writing classes, a former physical therapist leading gentle movement sessions, a widowed accountant providing free tax preparation for seniors on limited incomes. Melissa remained a steadfast presence through it all, though she maintained her separate apartment. She helped coordinate programs, created our website, and used her legal expertise to establish the Second Chapter initiative as a proper nonprofit organization with a formal board and sustainable funding structure. The life estate remains exactly as we planned, she assured me when I expressed concern about the house's increasingly public role. This is still your home to use as you see fit. I'm just happy it's bringing so much joy during your lifetime. My relationship with Daniel remained fractured. After the failed guardianship petition, he had moved to a city about 3 hours away, taking a corporate job that was far less glamorous than his entrepreneurial ambitions, but provided steady income. We hadn't spoken since the courthouse steps, though I sent cards at Christmas and his birthday, always with the same message. The door remains open when you're ready. Love, Mom. The cards came back unopened. I told myself I had accepted this estrangement, that I had found peace with the painful reality that some relationships cannot be forced to heal. Most days, I even believed it. The vibrancy of my new life provided ample distraction from the persistent ache of his absence. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in early spring. I had just finished hosting a workshop on creative estate planning, alternatives to traditional wills and trusts that could reflect more personal values. As participants filed out with enthusiastic goodbyes, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, is this Helen Collins? The woman's voice was professional, slightly hesitant. Yes, speaking. Mrs. Collins, I'm Dr. Ramirez from Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling about your son, Daniel Collins. He's been admitted following a car accident. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. Is he? How serious is it? He's stable, but he has sustained significant injuries. A broken femur, fractured ribs, and a concussion. He'll require surgery and extended recovery time. She paused. He listed you as his emergency contact. After all that had happened, after the accusations and the legal battles, after the complete severing of communication, Daniel had still listed me as his emergency contact. The realization struck like a physical blow. I'll be there as soon as I can, I said, already calculating the 3-hour drive. Please tell him. Tell him his mother is coming. The hospital corridors seemed endless, a sterile labyrinth of beeping machines and hushed conversations. As a retired nurse, hospitals had once been my second home, a familiar environment where I moved with confidence and purpose. Now, as a mother seeking her injured son, the antiseptic scent and fluorescent lighting felt alien and oppressive. Room 417. I paused outside the door, suddenly uncertain. Would Daniel even want to see me? Had he listed me as his emergency contact, out of necessity rather than reconciliation? What if he ordered me to leave? Drawing a deep breath, I knocked gently and pushed the door open. Daniel lay propped against white pillows, his leg elevated in a complex apparatus of pins and straps, his face pale beneath a nasty bruise that spread from temple to jaw. An IV dripped steadily beside him. He turned at the sound of the door, and for an instant, something vulnerable and almost childlike flickered across his face, before his expression settled into careful neutrality. You came, he said simply. Of course I came. I moved cautiously into the room. You're my son. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, 35 years of shared history, and 1 year of bitter estrangement competing for dominance. The doctor says you're going to need surgery, I said finally. Daniel nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. Scheduled for tomorrow morning. They need to put pins in my femur. And after that? What's the recovery plan? He looked away, focusing on the window where afternoon sun cast geometric patterns on the sterile floor. 6 to 8 weeks non-weight-bearing, then physical therapy, probably for months. His voice tightened. I can't exactly manage stairs right now, and my apartment is on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator. The social worker is trying to find a short-term rehab facility that takes my insurance. I understood immediately the predicament he faced. A single man living alone, unable to care for himself, facing an institutional recovery when what he needed was a home with proper support. You could come stay with me, I said before I could second-guess myself. The house has the guest room on the 1st floor, no stairs necessary. I'm retired with flexible time, and I was a nurse for 40 years. I know how to care for someone recovering from orthopedic surgery. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, genuine surprise breaking through his guarded expression. After everything, you would do that? Yes. The answer came without hesitation, surprising even me with its certainty. Why? He asked, his voice barely audible. I considered the question carefully. Not long ago, I might have responded with platitudes about unconditional maternal love or Christian forgiveness. But our relationship had moved beyond such easy answers. We needed something more honest, more nuanced. Because helping you recover doesn't mean I've forgotten what happened between us, I said slowly. It doesn't erase the hurt or automatically fix what's broken. But it does mean I choose not to let those broken places define our entire relationship. You needed me as a child, and I was there. You need me now, and I can be there again, without compromising myself this time. Daniel was silent for a long moment, his eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. I don't deserve it, he said finally. This isn't about deserving, I replied. It's about choosing a different path forward than the one we've been on. We can figure out the rest as we go. 3 days later, following successful surgery, I brought Daniel home. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The son who had tried to force me out of my house was now dependent on that very house, and on me, for his recovery. The early days were awkward, our interactions stiff with the formality of strangers forced into intimate circumstances. I helped him manage pain medication, brought meals on trays, assisted with the unglamorous necessities of limited mobility. He said please and thank you with careful precision, watched me with wary eyes as if expecting conditions or recriminations that never came. Gradually, the ice began to thaw. Not in dramatic conversations or tearful apologies, but in small, ordinary moments. Daniel commented on the new paint color in the kitchen. I mentioned a movie I'd enjoyed recently. He asked about my garden plans for the spring. Normal, everyday exchanges that nonetheless felt monumental after a year of silence. The workshops continued during this time, though I scaled back my involvement to focus on Daniel's care. Participants were curious about the young man in the 1st floor guest room, but respectful of our privacy. Some recognized him from his foundation videos and news coverage, but no one commented directly. Eleanor, privy to the full story, simply squeezed my hand and said, "Healing takes many forms. Sometimes the body leads the way for the heart to follow." It was during the 3rd week of Daniel's stay that our carefully maintained détente faced its first real test. I had been helping him to the kitchen for lunch when the doorbell rang. It was Melissa, carrying a folder of grant applications for our nonprofit. She stopped short at the sight of Daniel, her expression cycling rapidly through surprise, confusion, and wariness. "I'm sorry," she said, addressing me while carefully avoiding looking directly at Daniel. "I didn't realize you had company. I can come back another time." "It's all right," I assured her. "Daniel is staying here while he recovers from surgery." "Daniel, you remember Melissa." The tension in the room thickened to an almost unbearable density. These two had not seen each other since before our public conflict, since before the videos, and the guardianship petition, since before Melissa had become the legal future owner of the house Daniel had desperately wanted. Daniel's face had gone pale beneath his fading bruises. "Hello, Melissa," he managed. Melissa nodded stiffly. "Daniel, I hope you're healing well." The awkward moment stretched until I gently suggested we all sit down. "Melissa brought some paperwork for the nonprofit," I explained to Daniel. "We're applying for a community development grant." "Nonprofit?" Daniel's confusion was evident. "The Second Chapter Initiative," Melissa replied, seemingly against her better judgment. "Your mother's program for senior empowerment. We've formalized it as a 501c3 organization." Daniel looked at me questioningly. "We offer workshops and resources to help seniors maintain independence and develop new skills," I explained. "It started it started last year. We use the house as our meeting space." Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. "That's why there are all those bookshelves in the dining room, and the whiteboards. I thought you had just redecorated." The moment could have turned bitter, could have devolved into recriminations about his attempts to control my home and finances. Instead, it opened a door to genuine conversation. "Would you tell me more about it?" Daniel asked. "Quietly, about what you're doing with the nonprofit?" For the next hour, Melissa and I explained the evolution of the Second Chapter Initiative, how it had grown from financial workshops to a comprehensive program supporting seniors in reimagining their later years on their own terms. How participants had reported reduced depression, increased confidence, and stronger social connections. How we had recently partnered with the local community college to offer technology classes specifically designed for older adults. Daniel listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions without a trace of the dismissiveness or condescension he had once shown toward my judgment and capabilities. When Melissa mentioned my role in creating the curriculum for our Life Reimagined series, he looked at me with what appeared to be genuine admiration. "You built all this in just a year?" he asked. "That's impressive." It was the first unqualified compliment he had given me in longer than I could remember. After Melissa left, Daniel was unusually quiet. I assumed he was tired from the extended social interaction and helped him back to his room for a rest. As I turned to leave, he spoke. "Mom, wait. There's something I need to say." I paused at the doorway, heart suddenly racing. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About so many things. About you. Watching you with Melissa today, hearing about the program you've created, I realized I never really saw you. Not as a whole person with your own dreams and abilities, just as, I don't know, an extension of myself, I guess. A resource." His candor stunned me. I moved back into the room and sat in the chair beside his bed, giving him space to continue. "When you refused to sell the house for my business, I was so angry. I felt entitled to your help, like it was owed to me. Then when I found out about the life estate with Melissa..." He shook his head slightly. "I convinced myself you must have been manipulated or confused. Because the alternative was accepting that you had made a sound decision that simply didn't benefit me. It wasn't about hurting you, Daniel, I said softly. It was about protecting myself, while still ensuring the house would go to someone who valued it as a home, not just as an asset. I understand that now, he replied. Seeing what you've created here, how you've transformed this place into something meaningful. He trailed off, looking around the room as if seeing it with new eyes. I wouldn't have done that. I would have sold it to the highest bidder without a second thought. The admission hung between us, honest and painful. What made you change? I asked. After everything that happened, the videos, the guardianship petition, what's different? Now? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. The accident, he said finally. When you're lying in a hospital bed, unable to even get to the bathroom without help, it clarifies things. I had a lot of time to think about who showed up for me when I needed them most. He met my eyes directly. It was you, Mom. After everything I did, it was still you. It wasn't a complete apology, not yet. There were still conversations we needed to have, hurts that needed to be addressed directly. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall of resentment and misunderstanding that had divided us. Over the following weeks, as Daniel's physical healing progressed, so too did our tentative reconciliation. It happened in stages, in careful conversations during meals or while I changed his bandages. Sometimes we spoke of the past, his childhood, my struggles as a single mother, the values I had tried to instill. Other times we focused on the present, his career aspirations, my evolving vision for the nonprofit, the shifting dynamics of our relationship. Occasionally, Daniel would sit in on the workshops when they were held in the living room, observing from his wheelchair as Eleanor guided participants through retirement planning strategies or as a local artist taught watercolor techniques. At first, the regulars were wary of his presence, remembering his public campaign against me. But Daniel's genuinely interested questions and his visible respect for the participants gradually eased their suspicions. Your son seems different from what I expected, one participant commented after a particularly engaging session on memoir writing. Based on those videos, I thought he'd be arrogant, controlling, I supplied with a small smile. She nodded. But he's been nothing but respectful, thoughtful even. People can change, I said, finding I actually believed it. 6 Degrees. Weeks after surgery, Daniel progressed to partial weight-bearing, leaning on crutches as he took his first tentative steps around the house. It was during this period that he asked the question I had been both expecting and dreading. What happens when I'm fully recovered, when I don't need to stay here anymore? We were sitting on the back porch, watching cardinals and chickadees squabble at the bird feeder. I had been dreading this conversation, fearing it would disrupt the fragile peace we had established. That's up to you, I said carefully. Your apartment is still there when you're ready to return to it. Daniel nodded slowly. And us? What happens to this? He gestured vaguely between us. That's also up to you, in large part, I replied. I'd like to think we could maintain some form of relationship. It won't be what it was before. I don't think either of us would want that. But perhaps we can build something new, something healthier. I'd like that, he said quietly. Then, after a pause, Mom, I want to apologize. Not just for the guardianship petition and the videos, though those were inexcusable, but for years before that, for treating you like a resource rather than a person, for assuming your assets belonged to me by default, for not respecting your right to make your own choices. The apology I had longed for, had sometimes despaired of ever hearing, now hung in the air between us. It wasn't perfect. No apology ever is. But it was sincere. I could see the genuine remorse in his eyes, hear it in his voice. "Thank you?" I said simply. "That means a great deal to me. I'm not asking you to change anything about the house or the life estate," he added hastily. "That's your decision, and I respect it now. I just needed to say I was wrong." I nodded, acknowledging the importance of his statement. "I appreciate that, Daniel. And while we're being honest, I should acknowledge that I played a role in our unhealthy dynamic too. I allowed patterns to develop that weren't good for either of us. I thought sacrificing everything for you was what a good mother did, but in some ways, it set you up with unrealistic expectations about what you were entitled to." Daniel considered this. "Maybe we both have some growing to do." "Growth doesn't stop at any particular age," I agreed. "That's one of the core principles of our nonprofit, actually." A slow smile spread across his face. "Speaking of the nonprofit, I've been thinking, once I'm back on my feet, I have some skills that might be useful to your organization. Marketing, social media, fundraising strategies. If you'd be open to it, I'd like to volunteer, give back a little." The offer took me by surprise. "You'd want to be involved with the Second Chapter initiative? Even with Melissa on the board?" "Especially with Melissa on the board," he replied. "She's smart, organized, and clearly dedicated to the mission. We have history, yes, but we're both adults. And besides, it might be good for me to work with someone who won't let me get away with being me at my worst." His self-awareness was a revelation, a sign of the reflection he must have done during his recovery. "I'd need to discuss it with the board," I said cautiously, "given your previous public stance." "I understand," he nodded, "and I'll accept whatever decision you make. But I want you to know I'm serious about making amends, not just with words, but with actions." That evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, I sat alone in my garden watching the stars emerge. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear. There were still struggles ahead, trust to rebuild, boundaries to maintain. But for the first time in years, perhaps even decades, I felt a sense of genuine possibility between us. Not the restoration of what was, but the creation of something new. Something that honored both his journey and mine, that recognized us as two adults with separate lives and valid needs, connected by love, but not by obligation or entitlement. The house that had been the catalyst for our most bitter conflict had, ironically, become the setting for our tentative reconciliation. Within its walls, Daniel was having the opportunity to see me as I truly was. Not just his mother, but a woman with skills, vision, and purpose beyond caregiving. And I was seeing him anew as well, not as the entitled son who had demanded my house, but as a flawed human being capable of growth, reflection, and genuine change. As summer settled fully over the garden, bringing long golden evenings and the sweet scent of jasmine, I realized that the true value of my home had never been in its market price or potential inheritance. Its worth lay in the life it made possible, the community it sheltered, the healing it facilitated, the second chances it offered to those within its walls, including, unexpectedly but perhaps most meaningfully, to the very son who had once demanded I sell it away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.